Welcome to a brand new edition of the Desmond Johnson Show here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobacco-road-sports-radio.com. Loaded show today from The Athletic. Joe Person stopping by to give us maybe our final attempt to figure out what the Carolina Panthers are going to do on Thursday and going forward in the NFL draft. Durham Herald Sun beat writer Steve Wiseman will join us a little bit later on in the program to talk about Duke hoops and the transfer portal. My main man David Glenn in the house from North Carolina Sports Network, co-hosting in his usual duties every other week here. Loaded show again. Open up your Lunchables, get ready, get it in here for lunchtime before you gotta get back to work. It's the Desmond Johnson Show. Let's hit it.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Yeah, welcome to the Carolinas. Everywhere you go, the sky is Carolina blue, the finest. Live action, feedback, the city need that. I've been number one, no cap. Here's the recap. Adrenaline is my addiction. I'm about to relapse. Step on the turf if you won't and get your weed wet. I'm going harder than a martyr on the starter end. It's the heart of man, that's a rap like a cardigan. I'm breaking records, it's 4th and inches, I count the seconds. The over-under's my roar of thunder, my secret weapon. Yeah, the game is to be told. I don't break, I break modes. Follow me on Tobacco Road.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
And again, welcome into the Desmond Johnson Show here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobacco-road-sports-radio.com. You can catch the best of on terrestrial radio in the Triad every Friday, 5 o'clock p.m. WWBG 1470 a.m. in Greensboro, and at 6 o'clock on WTOB 96.7 FM 980 a.m. In Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. I'm your host, Desmond Johnson, joined by David Glenn from the North Carolina Sports Network and Joe Person in the house from The Athletic, Carolina Panthers beat writer. I'm sure you've gotten plenty of sleep over the past couple of weeks, Joe, with nothing going on or whatever. Just the NFL draft kicking off here on Thursday. First round coverage on Thursday. And I just want to kind of jump right into it, Joe. Dan Morgan's press conference last week. I know you were there, and what was your biggest takeaway from what he said in terms of what the Panthers might do at 8? Because I've seen different people with different theories of, Dan's not really good with smoke and hiding what they were planning to do. The Panthers are pretty transparent when it comes to what they want at 8. What did you come away from that press conference thinking the Panthers really want to do?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Dan was kind of probably more of an open book than his handlers might have hoped he would be. But I think they like Jalen Walker a lot. I really do. I've thought that throughout this draft process. Nothing Dan said or didn't say last week at that presser convinced me otherwise. But I do think that he also made a pretty good, compelling case for a trade back, and that he was pretty open about that. That if the right situation presents itself, that he would be up. This is a team that has a lot of holes. You guys know that, and most of them, but not all, but most of them on the defensive side. And so if they were able to find somebody to trade up, and it doesn't seem like there's a ton of teams that are in that boat. And in recent days, there's been talk that Denver might be looking to come up from 20, but I think he would do that. But I don't think he would do that if Jalen Walker was still on the board. I really feel like that's where this is heading, and we shall see. But if a lot other teams like Jalen Walker too, and so if he were to get gone and Dan had an opportunity to move back, I think he would do that, and get into this higher into the second round, because right now they have 8 and then 57, big gap, and then also pick up a pick for next year.
DJ.
Joe, it's great to see you again, my friend. Backing up a little bit for that 60,000 feet view, we all know David Tepper is an incredibly competitive guy who hasn't had the success he wanted, obviously, as the Panthers owner. What do we know about how it works in Charlotte, maybe compared to other cities? The chain of command coming into a draft between David Tepper and then GM Dan Morgan, and then even obviously the coaches have their opinions too.
Yeah, he's involved. I would say, Dave, and good to see you as well. I don't know that he is as involved as he was in the last couple of years, and I think he has a leadership team in place now that he inherently trusts, and that is, and it's really a threefold. It's Dan Morgan, who we've been discussing here, Dave Canales, but then also Brand Tillis. We don't hear a lot about Brand Tillis. This is a guy that David Tepper tried to, I won't say tried to hire, but he interviewed him for the GM job when Scott Fitterer got hired. He interviewed him for the GM job when Dan Morgan got hired. And then obviously they brought him in as basically their cap and contracts guy from Kansas City. And was with a winning, obviously extremely successful Kansas City franchise for, I think, better part of 15 years. So the three of them, I believe, and also with some maybe some better PR handling, have kind of kept Dave Tepper more kind of in the background. And really, like when's the last time we've heard, it's probably last year at the draft, actually, where he infamously stopped by the Dilworth Neighborhood Grill, the Charlotte sports bar,
Right.
to question a sign that the owner had outside. But I do think that he's involved. I don't think he's as involved as he once was.
Joe Person joining us here from The Athletic. I'm glad you mentioned David Tepper, because I think David Tepper was kind of getting a bad rap towards the end of last year in terms of being that Scooby-Doo villain, meddling owner type thing. And I'm like, he owns the team. Like, if he wants to be at the practice, he can be at the practice. It's okay for him to be there. If he wants to have input on the draft, that's fine. But it does feel like he's backed off a little bit in terms of day-to-day, hands-on type approach, and kind of letting Dan and Dave kind of cook. What do you think are the main offensive and defensive targets for this eighth pick if they decide to stay there and not get stuck like Dan kind of alluded to last week? Who's the top offensive guy you think they're looking at? Who's the top defensive guy you think they're looking at to pick at 8?
Well, realistically, I think the two guys that people might be talking about offensively would be Tet McMillan, Arizona wide receiver, and then the Penn State tight end, Tyler Warren, who I'm fascinated with that guy. I don't know if y'all watched much Penn State.
Yeah.
He was just, first of all, the Penn State offensive coordinator, who I think they got, you guys would know this, he came from Kansas or somewhere. They ran an incredible offense, and Tyler Warren was front and center. You wouldn't think like the tight end would be like the cornerstone of it, but he was. But all that to say, I think the media, folks like us, are more interested in getting Bryce Young another weapon in the top 10 than maybe Dan Morgan is. And so would he take one of those guys if he were stuck? I don't know. I almost think he'd be more inclined to look at a defensive guy. So would that be Jalen Walker's teammate, Michael Williams, the edge rusher? Probably a little high for him. But, I wrote something at the owners' meetings, and I don't know that this would happen either, but there's some pretty interesting offensive tackles in this draft. And they have not extended Taylor Moton's contract. He is going to be 31, I think, in August, certainly by the start of the year. And I don't think they would go get a guy like Membu from Missouri, who looks just sort of like prototypical right tackle size and skill set. But it's something to think about. But I think Dan, if Jalen Walker's off the board, I think he would love to have some, and Tet McMillan presumably is there. He would love for some team to come up and get Tet McMillan, and Panthers go back.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that with the tackles, because say a guy like Will Campbell from Michigan is sitting there at 8, and just, there's always somebody that falls. Like, no matter what, there's a guy that everyone's talking about right now. It seems like everyone's hoping that Shedeur Sanders is the one that falls. And then there's always a quarterback or someone that gets picked way earlier than what we've been anticipating. And it feels like it's going to be either Shedeur or Will Campbell. I've seen the DB from Michigan start to drop a little bit because of some knee issues or something that are starting to get reported now. People are worried about his longevity. I have seen us connected to the two kids from Georgia. Walker in particular has picked up speed the past couple of weeks. He would fit a need, but to your point, Joe, you could really, pick any position in defense and it would fit a need for Carolina. I think a lot of the fans online have forgotten that the Carolina Panthers offense gave up more points than any team in NFL history. Like, I don't even understand the whole logic of we need to get him a wide receiver at 8. I'm like, we need to get like 5 more picks and get bodies in here before we even worry about doing that kind of thing.
I agree. And honestly, you have a former Panther linebacker running the draft in Dan Morgan. I don't think you can ignore that. And if you look at free agency, that was heavy defense. And Desmond, you opened this segment talking about Dan Morgan's transparency. Last year, his first year as GM at the Combine, he talked about improving the offensive line. A couple weeks later, they go spend big on 2 guards, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. This year at the Combine, he basically said, look, remember what we did last year? We want to do that in the defense this year, especially the defensive front. And so they took care, obviously they took a big swing, did not get Milton Williams, but they did pick up some other pieces along the defensive line, including Tershawn Wharton, former Chiefs defensive tackle. But they made a little move at edge rusher with Patrick Jones. But I still think, Jadeveon Clowney's getting long in the tooth, plus he's only under contract for 1 more year. That just feels like the position where they really could use another dude. And whether you want to call him Clowney's successor, what have you, I think that is the spot that these guys are focusing on.
Circling back to something you said earlier, do we know what Dan Morgan's philosophy is in terms of just the sheer number of picks? I think, 9 is kind of a normal-ish number, not low, not high. The trade back option, as you mentioned. They did have the worst point differential in the National Football League, right? So, but I don't know. Not all GMs believe that volume is greater than those higher value picks. Do we know where Dan and his team stand on that?
It's a great question. And he was not, I don't know that he's been asked that in 2 years here, Dave, but I do know that I'm thinking like Dave Gettleman had a draft class 1 year here that's like 5 guys.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I do think that Dan Morgan is going to be open. I don't think they're trading up in the first round. They did that with Bryce. They still, and it looks like, it's still the verdict's still out, but at least now Bryce is showing hope that trade might end up bearing big time fruit. But what was I going to say? The fact that I think we could see Dan trading both directions in the second and third days of this draft. I just can't imagine if they pick 8. I just can't see this team with so many needs. And I mentioned this earlier, but just sort of sitting on their hands until 57.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the Bears have 1 more pick of the Panthers from that Bryce trade to make
second round,
early in the second round on Friday. But we'll see. Go ahead, Desmond.
I was going to say, I've seen folks suggest that the Pittsburgh Steelers might be willing to trade up to possibly land Shador. They're picking at 21 right now. The problem is when they did the DK Metcalf trade, they gave up their second round pick. So they don't have as much collateral for this draft as a lot of people may assume they would want. And to your point, Joe, I'd imagine Dan would not want to sit around until 10 o'clock on Friday night before he gets to pick again in the second round. There's a lot of space from 8 to 57 or whatnot, and you can literally build a team in that stretch. But I'm curious about this because all the talk's been about trade down. Say Shador drops or someone drops and it alters that first 8 or 9 picks out of the norm, or someone shoots up that no one was talking about and it started to push some players down that we didn't expect. What player do you think the Panthers would trade up for if the situation occurred?
I don't think they're going to do it. I really don't. I have asked that type of question in the last weeks and months, and I just do not get the sense. My knee-jerk reaction is to say Abdul Carter because of what we talked about just a minute ago about their need for an edge rusher and that guy checking all those boxes. But I don't know. I just think they've given up so much draft capital in recent years that they would be leery of doing that. Never say never, right? But that's my sense on that one.
So the draft starts Thursday. I want to say it's 7 p.m. ESPN will have it there for the first round. This the NFL is king in terms of owning a weekend when it comes to this kind of stuff. They're going to be on all weekend long. There's going to be folks that are claiming they're not going to watch the draft like me, and I'll end up watching the entire damn thing. And I don't know why. I'll literally sit there and watch, who's that guy? Who's that guy? Like by the time you get to Saturday, like I have no idea who these people are, which is why I don't do mocks, like 7-round mock drafts, because I don't watch enough college football to be able to sit there and knowledgeably be like, this DB from Northern Iowa is going to be the 6th-round pick for the Carolina Panthers. I don't know. Once we get past number 8, really the top 10, and it feels like this draft is top heavy. Like really, once you get out of the first 8-10 players, the next like 30 players feel like they're kind of almost interchangeable. It just depends on the team and what your needs are, and you can kind of go grocery shopping and pick what you want, which is why I love they put free agency ahead of the draft is the way before used to be after. So you're kind of reaching in the draft, and then you get into free agency by them switching it around. Now the Panthers can go in this and go, okay, let's just see what the board, falls to and see what we can get. Joe, tell them where they can find your work here on The Athletic, and I'm sure you're going to be quite busy over the next couple of days.
Yeah, we're still at theathletic.com. Lots of draft coverage, as you can imagine. Good stuff. And then on Twitter, I'm at Joseph Person. And yeah, you guys have going through that draft history, Desmond. You guys remember when we would spend like all day Saturdays in these, and I was covering the Falcons at the time, and that was a long day starting Saturday. I think it still only started at noon, but
I think so. And it would be like the first, second, third round, and then like they jam the other 4 rounds into Sunday, and it would just be like rapid fire, like boom, 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 like picks are coming in. With this, they're stretching out where the entire first round is going to take 3 hours, 4 hours on Thursday, and then second and third round on Friday. But follow Joe this week. If anything pops off, if the Panthers decide to do something crazy, Joe's gonna probably one of the first ones to bring you the info. So Joe, appreciate you stopping by, man. I know you're busy this week, and we'll talk to you soon.
I appreciate it. Tell your next guest, Steve Wiseman, I said, hey, he and I formerly worked together.
Oh, will do. He's sitting back in the green room, so he just heard it and gave a thumbs up. So I'll definitely let him know that. And there he goes, Joe Person from the Athletic, bringing in Steve Wiseman from the Durham Herald Sun to talk a little Duke hoops before we get you back to your second half of your workday. Steve, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
Hey, let me first say I was stunned to hear Joe propping up a tight end. Since Joe played tight end at William and Mary, so we have to go back to his whole history. So he's always a fan of tight ends, and he should be. So Joe's a great guy, good friend.
I feel like Tyler Warren's going to get picked like early, like top 5 at this point. He keeps getting pushed up into the top of this draft, and he would be cool to have. But we just drafted a tight end last year, so I don't really know if he'd be in play for us here. Wanted to talk a little bit about Duke and what's going on with the roster changing. We knew that the freshmen were going to be going, and Duke does this thing where they kind of delay the announcement so each one kind of gets a day to shine or whatnot. So it was only a matter of time for Cooper Fleck announced. There was never a shot of Cooper staying for sophomore year, in your opinion, right, Steve?
Zero. Never believed it. It was never a possibility. Again, Zion said the same thing. Now this is before NIL, of course. I understand it's different, but like, he loved being at Duke. He loved the experience of it. And they had to talk to him in the end, like, we got to make this announcement, man. We got to do this. And so kind of the same thing with Cooper. He enjoyed it, but there was no chance he was going to come back. It wasn't in the cards. It wasn't set up that way.
So the first thing I want to ask before I turn you over to DG, because actually, DG, do you have an update on how many kids are in the portal now that we've kind of gotten through the first
more
part?
than 2,000 in Division I men's basketball. I believe that number counts walk-ons. Sometimes walk-ons at top programs can get scholarships at lower Division I programs, but still 2,000 plus was the all-time record 1 year ago. And I believe we've either exceeded it or we're about to exceed it with, as we speak, today's the last day you can put your name in, but I always remind fans, that doesn't mean you have to decide by April 22nd. You just have to get your name in by April 22nd.
So keep an eye open. There might be some names that pop up today that we weren't expecting to pop up. Van Allen Lubin from UNC a couple days ago, or yesterday, actually said his thing. He's getting in, but he's planning on coming back, yada, yada, yada. But there might be some names like that out there.
And there's a couple of things going on there, too. Number one, what you said, guys that are going in because they want to renegotiate their NIL deal. And so you have to have that leverage, right? You have to be in the portal to be able to match it against other schools. So that's happening. Even guys that really aren't going to leave, right, like that. And also, you mentioned the walk-ons that are getting in there, and guys that are seeking a 6 year of eligibility, because there's a lot of court cases right now where guys are trying to throw out the NCAA's 5 year clock. And so you have guys that have no eligibility left, like Sion James isn't doing it, but he'd be an example. Somebody like
Right.
that would go in the portal and say, just in case the court overturns it, I want to have the option to go somewhere.
Is that what Alan Libben's doing?
It's crazy right now. It's got to be impossible for fans to follow because guys like Steve and I, this is what we do for a living, and it's sometimes hard for us to follow. Ian Shefflin, star forward at Clemson, is out of college eligibility by every definition of eligibility in the history of the world. But as Steve correctly noted, there's some hovering, lingering lawsuits where people believe either the NCAA is just going to give everybody 5 years of, and this is putting aside COVID, that's another complication, but most of those guys have cycled out. This would be just everybody gets 5 full years of competition, either the NCAA adopting that rule, which I don't think they will, or abandoning their principles and caving into these lawsuits and giving basically those who have any argument 1 more year. I don't think that'll happen either. But it's just complicating when you see a list of guys who have put their names in the portal. Some of these guys have a tiny, tiny chance of ever playing college basketball again. And that means when you look at a list, it's hard to decipher who's a real transfer and who's one of these guys kind of clinging to the 1% chance that some judge or some rule will change so that they get 1 more year of eligibility.
Steve Wiseman joining us from the Durham Herald Sun, along with David Glenn from North Carolina Sports Network. Let me ask both of you, geniuses, while I've got you on the screen at the same time here. What's the one rule you would put in place to kind of maybe stymie with the movement? Because I saw yesterday Dontrez Styles is going into the transfer portal again. Like literally, like
he fits the same description, by the way. He's
time?
out of eligibility unless one of these things happens.
So like there's a lot of those kind of kids that are coming in and doing that type of thing and not sticking around or doing whatnot. But that makes more sense now that he's doing it because of that. But it feels like the power has moved to the players completely. The point guard from Memphis, PJ Haggerty, I think Haggerty is his name. He's literally out here asking for $4 million and a guarantee that he would play point guard. And really, it's crazy because one of the few schools that might actually even have that kind of money is the Duke Blue Devils, who actually need a point guard now because Tyrese Proctor's declared for the NBA draft and Caleb Foster's coming off the bench. What was the bigger move there, Steve? Proctor declaring for the NBA draft or Foster staying?
Well, Proctor declaring because he would have been the returning starter, no question about it. But there wasn't much doubt he was going to go. I mean, even though he's not, projected as a lottery pick or even a first round pick in most mocks, like the other guys are, he was kind of ready to go and ready to move on with his life and become a professional athlete. So, I think had Tyrese come back, Duke would have been in a position to have an even better team next year. But since he's going, the fact that Caleb Foster is coming back is a big deal because he's had 2 years of experience. He's shown at different times, different high-level skills. He was a pretty good three-point shooter as a freshman. Last year, he handled the ball a little bit more, played some pretty good defense at times. They just need him to be more consistent, be able to do that all for 30, 35 minutes a game if he's going to play and start at that position, rather than kind of the part-time role he's seen in the last 2 years.
Des, my geeky lawyer answer to your earlier question is I want to see collective bargaining. That's what happens in professional sports. The one way for fans to remember what collective bargaining means is there's no such thing as an NFL draft or an NBA draft unless a players association represented by a union and a bunch of owners who have their own attorneys get together and devise that system. If you had a draft in any industry in America, you're forced to go to this team or this law firm or this whatever. Patently illegal. No, you can't have a draft unless it is collectively bargained. Either it's going to take literally, I know it's a joke phrase, an act of Congress. It will either take an act of Congress to give this new framework for the future of college athletics, which I'm not optimistic about that right now.
Me either.
Or it will take a college version of collective bargaining where you can write the rules for the most part however you want. If you want the transfer to pay some kind of penalty, the way a coach has to pay a buyout to leave his school, you could write that into the system as long as both sides agree. If you want the smaller school to be compensated by the bigger school, when that smaller school cultivates a guy and develops him for 3 years and then he leaps up to one of the bigger, you could write that into the system. There's all sorts of possibilities as long as everybody has legal representation. But The NCAA doesn't want these people to be considered employees. And there's all sorts of legal red tape that I won't even give people headaches with by trying to describe. But I am fascinated. I'm so glad Steve is with us. You know this, Steve. Like, this is, coaches love to call this portal speed dating, right? Instead of 3 years to get to know a young man and his family, you have like a month. What is your educated guess on Jon Scheyer's view of this universe right now? Because not all the announcements have been made, right? And so many transfers have already picked their new school. So when he looks at his roster, what do you think he thinks he needs? And what do you know about transfers he's looking at, or some of the lingering decisions that haven't been announced yet?
Yeah, I mean, the one freshman that hasn't announced yet is Kaman Maliwatch, who's going to go. I mean, he's working out with his agents and all that. And of course, he's got the back to legal stuff, the deportation issue, because he's from South Sudan, which is a pretty scary situation there. But anyway, that'll happen this week. He'll announce. What they think they need is a veteran guard, another veteran in the backcourt. They had so much success last year by adding Sion James in addition to Mason Gillis. And if you go back a year from now, back last year, 1 year, at the time we thought Mason Gillis was probably the bigger addition than Sion James. It turned out to be the opposite. And so you never know as you get these guys how it's going to turn out. But I know that the fact they had some experienced guys, they thought that would work out, and it did work out. And so I think a guy like Cedric Coward from Washington State, who started his career at Eastern Washington, who only played 6 games last year because of a shoulder injury, but he's healthy now. I know he and Duke have mutual interest, and you know that could come to be. We'll see, but I know that's a guy they're looking at really strongly. That would help them in the backcourt, because if they have him and Caleb Foster back there, and then you also have Isaiah Evans coming back, you have Darren Harris coming back, you have Caden Boozer coming in. You got some depth there. And I mentioned Isaiah because he hasn't formally announced he's coming back. Today's the deadline for the portal. As of right now, everything I know is he's coming back, but it's 1 o'clock on, that could change.
So
Somebody comes in with a bag in a half hour and it's changing, right? So as far as I know, but again, the deadline's not here yet. So anyway,
this show has a track record of saying something at 12:45, and by 3:15, it's completely been altered. So we'll see if that continues on with Steve with the Isaiah Evans prediction that it'll be sticking around. I think he's sticking around too. Steve, you can find his work on Twitter, also at the Durham Herald Sun. Of course, you can follow the North Carolina Sports Network and David Glenn. They have been busy as well, tracking the billion kids that are in the transfer portal. And didn't the transfer portal open for football last week or something? A couple days ago? Just kids moving around all over the place. Just kids just everywhere. Just kids.
Tennessee and UCLA traded quarterbacks.
Yes,
I saw that. Yeah, I didn't even like what was going on.
That started at Appalachian State. Well, he played last year for App.
Right.
He did two changes in the portal before this. Before even out of the spring. So this
God.
Unfettered free agency is untenable. It's at some point it's got to be slowed down anyway. We talked about that with Congress a lot, but something's got to happen.
I will say, Steve, keep an eye on Duke sophomore wide receiver Quayshawn Brown. Played at East Forsyth. I've covered him extensively. I always said doing their games on Friday, he felt like a Sunday player to me watching him play. I saw he had a great spring game this a couple days or past weekend. Shout at him. Keep an eye on him over the weekend, or keep an eye on him over the season. I feel like he's going to have a breakout year this year.
Yeah, the coaches love him. They call him Queso. They think he's spicy and fantastic. So.
And he's shy too. He's a great kid. Fun to watch.
Yeah.
Super twitch kind of like athlete.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he's going to be special. So definitely keep an eye out for him. I got to get everybody out of their lunch breaks and back to work. But shout out to David Glenn for joining us as he does every other weekend. Follow their work over the North Carolina Sports Network. Follow Steve Wiseman's work over at the Durham Herald Sun as we keep track of everything going on with Duke and the basketball team. Again, the portal. The deadline is today, so keep your eyes and ears on X or wherever you follow for your sports and see who's coming in, coming out. Because I get a feeling there's going to be some late additions here before the evening gets upon us. So for DG and for Steve, shout out to Joe Person for joining us from The Athletic earlier. We will see you guys tomorrow.